It started with a name, Trita Parsi, a smooth operator, founder of the National Iranian-American Council, NIAC. They said it was for Iranian Americans, a voice for the diaspora. But peel back the layers, and it reeked of something darker. Emails from the shadows, linking Parsi to Mohammad Javad Zarif, Iran's foreign minister, arranging meetings with US Congress like a backroom deal in a foggy alley. NIAC pushed for the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, whispering sweet nothings about diplomacy while the regime built its arsenal. Critics called it the Iran lobby, unregistered, slipping through the cracks. A court case in 2012 laid it bare. Parsi sued for defamation, claiming innocence, but the judge saw through the smoke. NIAC's work. Not inconsistent with the idea that he was first and foremost an advocate for the regime. No win for Parsi, just sanctions on his group for hiding evidence. And yet, they kept going. Visiting the White House 33 times under Obama, shaping policy like a ghost in the machine. NIAC wasn't alone. They had siblings in the shadows. Quincy Institute, where Parsi parked himself next, preaching restraint while the regime armed proxies and hanged protesters from cranes. His brother Rusbeh, over in Sweden, tangled in the same web, linked to Iranian initiatives to sway the West. Family business, huh? The kind that sells out souls for sanctions relief, ignoring the graves filling up in Evin prison. Then there was Negar Mortazavi, journalist, they said, exile, voice of reason. But her words echoed too close to Tehran's script. Photos surfaced, dinners with regime officials, hijab on, smiling like old friends. She opposed sanctioning the IRGC, those same guards who gunned down kids in the streets. Frequent guest on NPR, CNN, pushing narratives that softened the edges. Protests as misinformation, regime ties as smears from fringe groups. Diaspora called her out, but she played the victim card, harassment from both sides. Funny how her analysis always landed regime side up, defending Zarif like he was just a misunderstood diplomat. Independent media? More like a mouthpiece, laundering the blood off the mullah's hands. Tens of thousands dead. Yet these voices in the West portrayed the regime as a partner for peace, lobbying against intervention, blaming sanctions for the misery Tehran brewed itself. The Islamic Republic's tendrils reached far, twisting truth in boardrooms and broadcasts. But shadows can't hide forever. One day, the light would break through, and the puppets would fall. Until then, I'd keep watching, keep whispering the names of the fallen, calm, sad, unforgiving.
Joining us now is Dr. Trita Parsi to break down this ongoing situation with Iran. Sir, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you. I don't believe some of these huge numbers are being thrown out there because the methodology behind them just doesn't seem to be sound. But it does seem very likely that between 5,000 and 6,000, or perhaps more, up to 7,000 were killed. And that is a huge number. It's never happened before. And this has just left the country in a state of shock. It has further eroded whatever little legitimacy the regime had. It has also consolidated other elements within the security apparatus, because they also point to this other factor that is rarely talked about, which is there were also clearly very, very violent elements within the protest movement. I personally think that they're separate from the protest movement. There's something that was there that was going to take advantage of massive protests to do this. I spoke to one person who was out in the streets, had been in every protest before from 2009. And he said that they were just shocked to see these men in black acting very fast, looked professional, had clear plans, putting buildings on fire, fighting with police, putting policemen on fire. And in 2009, he told me that whenever there was any violence, the protesters themselves quickly put an end to it because they had such a strong discipline of nonviolence. This time around, he said, no one dared to intervene because people were equally afraid of these violent elements within the protest movement, as well as the thugs of the Basij movement, this militia, etc. So he actually ended up going home because this was not what I signed up for. I wanted to protest against the government about what they're doing, the horrible state of life in Iran, but not this.
Wow.
So I think there's another narrative out there, another reality that is not being discussed enough because, even the US government acknowledges that about 300 police were killed. Well, how were they killed? Who killed them?
Right. And with what weapons?
Something else going on.
Where did the weapons
here.
come from? Yeah.
Like, where did the weapons come from? And then you have Mike Pompeo giving interviews to the Israeli news outlets claiming that, the U.S. did everything it could to help the protesters, including weapons. I don't know if that's true or if that's just his way of sabotaging the talks and playing psychological warfare. But bottom line is we know that this was very, very different from any previous protest. But that also then indicates that the regime has, to a very large extent, lost control of the security of the country. So even if their narrative has some element of truth, it actually is a strike against them because it reveals that they actually have not been able to root out the presence of either violent elements or elements that have been supported by outside groups.
What is your understanding of why there has not been military action to this point?
I think the main reason, first of all, about 2.5 weeks ago, Trump almost took military action, as you all remember, and then he called it off. My understanding is that there had been an attempt to get the Iranians to agree to a limited strike in which the Iranians then would respond symbolically as they had done before, and it would make Trump look very good, and the Iranians would have escaped a real war. But the Iranian response was, no, if there is an attack, you will have full-scale war. And I think that took the president back, and that's why he ended up having all of these other military assets drawn to the region. Whether he's doing that because he ultimately wants to attack, or whether he does that because he wants to try that bargain again, or try it at the diplomatic table, remains to be seen, of course.
How do you think Trump is thinking about this? I understand what Israel wants in terms, vis-a-vis Iran. They want either regime change to some puppet regime or total state collapse, and you've laid that out very effectively. What does Trump really want here? Is it just another, sugar high, like he had his successful military, quote unquote, victory in Venezuela? What is it truly that he's actually after?
I do think that there is a search for sugar highs and an overconfidence following both the Midnight Hammer as well as the operation in Venezuela, in which there is this naive belief that this can just be cookie cutter repeated wherever he wants to go, and it just simply cannot.
And what I think was interesting or different in this phase was that at the beginning, the government didn't come in with that sort of iron fist crackdown approach. In fact, when the protests started in the heart of Tehran's bazaar due to an economic policy change by the government, the devaluation of the Iranian currency, certain subsidies that had been removed in an area that, to Dan's point, has created a lot of corruption. And essentially the government's point is we want to remove these subsidies for a certain class of merchants and then redistribute the cash to the end user, to the public. Just to add to your point, I think this is so correct. And unfortunately, sometimes we get analysis that's the opposite of that the system is so rigid, they're not going to give an inch because if they show any flexibility, they have to go all the way. And that's not what's happened over the years, with the issue of, like you said, from the 1980s, the war, the nuclear deal, and in between, smaller issues. There was a time when owning a satellite dish, I remember a time living in Iran when owning a satellite dish was illegal. I don't think that law has changed on paper. It was never announced that, we failed, this is good. But now you go on a rooftop in any city in Iran and it's just littered. All buildings are littered with satellite dishes. They just gave up. And I think on the issue of hijab also, after the 2022 protests, we really saw sort of a dramatic shift that was coming over the years of resistance, of women fighting back this dress code. But we saw that shift, and essentially the system giving up that control because of the kind of pressure that was coming. And this time, I think And we see indications that they want to. I mean, parts of the system, the Pezeshkian government, administration, whatever, see this high level of corruption, how the economy is not working for their own constituents, people who voted them into these elected positions. But this is not like hijab. This is not a domestic issue. The Iranian economy is not going to improve a lot without fixing sort of that whole foreign policy file, because one major underlying aspect of this is sanctions. Yes, you can fix corruption as much as you want, crack down on everyone, mismanagement, you can manage this, but without sort of resolving that issue, and that has to come from diplomacy, from negotiations, and from shifting the direction of the country's foreign policy, nuclear policy, regional presence, and making that decision essentially for the leaders is, do you want a continuation of all of these policies, or do you want better economic improvement? And so far I haven't seen that, but I think that's sort of the direction that also the public, a big core of the population, is pushing for, that we can't live like this anymore, no matter how you justify your foreign policy. There was a clear sort of involvement from the outside, and like Dan is saying, we're not making this up. You had Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State of the United States, former head of CIA, tweeting that behind every Iranian protester there's a Mossad agent. I don't even know if that's humanly possible, but when you do that, it has consequences. This is read in Tehran. This is, taken seriously as an excuse or as a belief. You're essentially painting every protester as a collaborator of whoever's behind them as a Mossad agent. But yes, we see this high number, the highest number of security forces being killed, and the raw anger on the street. And sort of the general picture that I've heard from people who were on the ground or analysts who explain is that they were these pockets of saboteurs, and like Dan is saying, they don't need to go to Tel Aviv to be trained. You just need to be a little organized and a little violent and have a plan. But then a large sea of an angry crowd in every city, in every town, who is willing to join in and get involved in this kind of violence. So you just need one person to go into a mosque, start the fire, and then 100 angry people to join them. Lots of mosques were set on fire, beyond just the regular, trash can or a car, stuff, very systematic destruction, haunting or killing of these forces that are seen also as launching sort of the same level of violence, deadly violence against the protesters. And we also see that what I think was disturbing, the rhetoric of justifying this violence online in the diaspora among known influencers or social cultural figures, essentially saying this is what you're supposed to do. The security forces are killing you. You need to kill them as well. And I think that's what has created sort of this difference, this stark difference. But
it still raises the question, where do they get the guns from?
I mean, this is yet another juncture in the history of the Islamic Republic, like previous mass protests, 2022, Women Life Freedom, 2019, again with an economic spark, before that, the Green Movement, that there's no going back to before. But also, as Dan was suggesting, what's ahead of us is not as clear as we see some painting it, this is their last step, or this is essentially calling it a revolution, giving this illusion that to some even on the ground that this is it. This is that they were calling it, quote unquote, the final battle, as if you're coming out of this with a regime collapse or regime change that's imminent. And we didn't see that happening. It's a very massive death toll, the highest, like you're saying, in recent history of mass protests in the Islamic Republic. Also the highest on the side of the security forces. Hundreds have been killed. So, which paints sort of the very violent, a picture of the kind of violence on the street. I've spoken to people who were eyewitnesses, present on the street, and some described the scenes as essentially a street war zone. The June war, I think, sort of showed that that Iranians, and I've talked to a lot of people who were on the ground during that war, all walks of life, pro, against, in between, on the fence, and it really united, I would say, Iranians in an opposition to that kind of a military threat or military attack. There's again this understanding that yes, there's an outside threat, and then there's this inside threat, and we're essentially caught between a rock and a hard place. And it doesn't mean that you have an affinity for one or the other if you oppose both. And I think that's kind of sort of the nuance or the discourse that we're also missing in a lot of the conversations that now we're hearing from the diaspora.
What Trump and them are afraid of is a full-blown war. And it seems that the Iranians are basically willing to roll the dice. Again, what Parsi told us was, we know we can't win a war, but we can make it pretty miserable for all of you and for everybody else. Yeah. Long-time strategy of U.S. adversaries.
And so, what they're banking on is, okay, the conciliatory approach obviously didn't work because here we are back having our country threatened again. This did not succeed. And so what does Trump actually respect? And what he respects and what he responds to is, hey, listen, yeah, you have more firepower than we do, but we can make you suffer. We can cause pain. We can cause pain among your regional allies. We can exact a price on your service members who are in the region. And critically, we can cause a lot of financial pain. I mean, this is the weapon of warfare that we've been consistently using against Iran. And the Iranians have their own cards that they can play with regard to that. No, obviously they don't have all the levers of the global financial system the way that we do, but they do have very critical location and obviously very critical to the oil market. So, and are our citizens ready to pay that price? No, they don't want that. They're not interested in that. And Trump is not gonna be around forever. So we're like, okay, we can threaten you credibly with exacting some pain. And we don't think that you really are up to that. We don't think you really have the stomach to persist if we credibly threaten you. And so it is in my opinion, it is a much more intelligent strategy given Trump's psychology.
So many people, oh my gosh, you won't believe what these radicals are doing. And of course, it just seems to be that whenever Bibi Netanyahu's around the corner, like, hey, I want that piece of land, suddenly our media starts telling us, hey, you wouldn't believe how free these people are trying to get in Iran. These people are really, woo, we need to free the Iranians. Oh, they've been living in oppression. Bibi is over here like, ooh, land. Oh no, really? It's about spreading democracy. Code word, that's military code word for dropping bombs and stealing a bunch of stuff.
لابی درسته مطابق سبک خودمون که سبک خودمون چی باید باشه من شما میشینیم بعداً صحبت میکنیم الان
به سبک خودمون به سبک خودمون تریتا پارسی بود دیگه ای دکتر
حالا بله نه خیر اینا داره برنامه ضبط میشه دیگه اون یه داستان دیگه است تریتا پارسی چون مثلا شما ببینید این مشکل آقای روحانی بود یک دقیقه آیه